Hi, my name is Patrick Phillips. I'm the acting executive director of the new Phil and Penny Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact at the University of Oregon. And we are absolutely thrilled to have you here tonight. This is an amazing crowd. This is the third of our Science Night Outs, and it's a new effort at the University of Oregon to come out and communicate the science that we're doing both on campus, but also more importantly, is to talk about some of the major themes in science that are moving in society these days and to engage the entire community. I think we all recognize that there are many different scientific advances that are continuing to have impacts on our lives, and to some extent, the science starts getting ahead of the rest of society. And we really want to make sure that, that you as citizens are engaged in the discussion and the process of what we're doing here. So this is a great evening. I think it's going to be fun. I thought about whether or not we should start developing a tagline where I come out and say science or something like that. But hopefully that's what you'll feel by the end of the evening. So if you haven't joined us before, the way that this works is it's actually an interactive evening that we'll do. I'm going to actually talk about a few minutes talking about some science in the news. At the last one, I talked about the recent discoveries about how we have Neanderthal and other ancient human DNA that's been discovered in our genomes and what that might mean. I'll talk about something else. And then we'll turn to our featured speaker, David McCormick, and he'll give a more extended talk, and I know that's you're all excited to hear what David has to say. But just to start, let's see if I actually have this on. Yep. This is an event that's sponsored by the Knight Campus, and it's part of our overall activities. The mission of the Knight Campus is science advancing society. And so it's a new effort, really outward-looking effort at the University of Oregon to translate the fundamental discoveries that we've been making on campus and are famous for around the world, and then think about new ways of moving them out into the world. And not just kind of in a normal way, but how can we really accelerate this pace of both discovery and impact on society? And so we use this impact cycle as a way of representing that, where not only do the discoveries move out, but the way that we interact in the broader world then feeds back into the way that we approach and the discoveries that we make within that. Now, you may have noticed that the most advanced part of the Knight Campus so far is that there's a flat space on the corner of Agate and Franklin, and that's not by accident, it turns out. So we're going to build a new building there, and there's lots that could be said about that, but it's going to be an exciting new entrance to the University of Oregon and entrance to the city of Eugene along Franklin Boulevard. We're very excited. Everything is moving forward apace. Right now, everything is flat, and pretty soon it'll start going down into a big ditch, and then this beautiful building will start emerging. And we anticipate that the building will be open in early 2020. So it's going to be a couple of years of construction here. It's a complex, really exciting building. So we look forward to you all being there at the opening in a few years. So I wanted to start this evening by just talking about something that I think is extremely important. It's accelerating the rate of the impact that genetics is having on us. And I don't think that everybody is totally aware where we are with this. And so I think it's something that you should be aware of. Sorry, one ahead. So how many of you have ever been around a child that's ill? Did you get sick yourself? Sometimes that happens. There was recently a news article that talked about the fact that households with children have viral loads that are 3 to 4 times higher than those without. So we know that children move diseases around, many people do. So why are we not all dead from our kids? That's, maybe I phrased that incorrectly, but what I really mean is, why do we get sick? And why do we get better? And it's because we have this immune system, right? Everybody's familiar with this. So the way that the immune system works is it takes a little while. We're exposed to a disease, and our body learns what's going on through a variety of processes that are complex and quite fascinating. it can understand what the disease is, let's say a virus, and then it remembers, right? It's called the adaptive immune system. It remembers the exposures that we've had, and then that goes on in the future. Imagine if that memory could be transmitted to other individuals somehow. Wouldn't that be amazing? So what if we could give our kids the memory of the diseases that we've encountered? That would solve a lot of problems. What if each of you right now had a memory of every disease that all of your relatives have ever encountered in the last 10,000 years? That would be a very different kind of world, wouldn't it? Well, it turns out that there are organisms that do this. They're not called humans, they're called bacteria, okay? So there are bacteria that can remember the exposures that they have, just like we do. They have kind of an immune system, but they remember it in a very integral way. They incorporate that memory into themselves such that it's transmitted into their babies, essentially. So, whoops, I'm having a double-click problem here. All right, so here's a virus that's attacking a bacterial cell, and the way that the virus works is it injects its genetic information into the cell, and then it actually co-opts the machinery of the cell to make proteins that in turn just end up making another virus. And this is essentially what a virus does to you. The bacteria are clever, and they actually make a copy of the genetic material from the virus, and they insert it into their own DNA so that they have a permanent copy of that. And every time their DNA replicates, for instance, when they make a new cell, their babies, then that memory of the fact that they've been exposed to that virus gets propagated. Okay? So that's pretty cool, except that it's just a memory there. The amazing part is that they can then operate on that memory, so they can take that piece of genetic information and then they include that with a protein that then can seek out other pieces of DNA that have that same signature. Gosh. There we go. So this protein that binds the signature is called Cas9, and it can go around and look for a piece of DNA that matches the memory DNA, and it searches around, and you can see that it does this in a one-to-one match thing. So the red thing is the memory DNA, and then it unfolds on this piece of DNA. And then the magic happens. It's matched up in this lockstep way, and then, watch this part, it bites it and breaks it, okay? Whoops, now we gotta watch the whole thing again. So what happens is it's able to find that DNA and chew it up, and so the virus then gets chewed up, and this is how the memory is transmitted, okay? So it turns out that DNA is the same in all organisms, if you're a bacteria, human, an elephant, whatever you are. Elephants in the audience, no. So what molecular biologists have done is they've discovered that they can take this same system out of bacteria and use it to manipulate DNA and other things. So you would say, okay, well, that's great. Now we can chew up DNA. But what they can do is use that same signal to break a piece of DNA in another organism, and then that DNA can be repaired, and then that can deactivate a gene that's directly associated with it. So it's a way of directly manipulating a piece of DNA based on the genetic information of specific DNA sequence, is a technical word, so that we can directly manipulate DNA in any organism. So this is something that I do in my lab all the time. I actually don't do it. I have people that help me because they're actually competent. So we do this all the time, and we make, I work with these little worms, and we make worms that do whatever we want. Usually we knock out some genes, or we put some other things. Sometimes we make them glow green. We can do all sorts of stuff with this technology. Okay. So the important thing is that we can now manipulate any piece of DNA in any organism in a very precise way. Okay, does that sound exciting? Does that sound scary? Okay, this is why you got to know. You got to be thinking about this. We're just scientists, okay? You got to be thinking about what we're supposed to be doing with this. So what could we do? Well, it turns out If you could think about what we could do, the Chinese have already done it, okay? So the thing that the first trials that were done in this is to take actually parts of our immune system, some cells, you know bone marrow and bone marrow transplants, so you can take the bone marrow cells out, and the Chinese scientists were the first ones to do this, to manipulate the immune system of the human so that it would attack specific cancer cells. So you take the cells out of you, use this new DNA editing technology, edit the DNA, put those cells back in, and now they make new proteins that specifically identify the cancers, and then your own body will attack and kill the cancer. So that sounds pretty cool. So the Chinese did this the first in 2016, so not that long ago. There's new, essentially now, I'm trying to find out, they said that there's going to be trials in the US starting in January, so presumably they're going on now. So this is happening now. The DNA is being taken out, manipulated, being put back in. Does that sound bad? No, it sounds pretty good. We'd like to cure cancer in this remarkable way, to use your own bodies to do it. And there's really nothing too controversial about this, even though it's DNA editing, because what's really happening, it's the same as any kind of medicine. You're taking something out, you're putting it back in our bodies. There's really no danger of anything going on. We're manipulating our own bodies a little bit, but we have genetic changes that occur. That's what led to the cancer in the first place all the time. So there's nothing too controversial about this particular application. But that doesn't mean that there can't be applications that could be controversial, right? So this is an egg. This is a human egg. So just like all the other cells in our body, eggs have DNA, so do sperm. And so we can manipulate the DNA in an egg and then change that. And then, again, that's exactly what we do in my lab. We take worm eggs and we edit them, and then we make new kinds of worms that have new kinds of DNA in them. That's interesting. The important thing is every worm baby from then on has that genetic change. So it's just like the bacteria, that instead of just kind of changing in our body like our immune system does, now we're changing forever all descendants of us. So if that would help us cure disease, that seems like a good idea. If we decide that we want to change some other thing, like we think that our baby should have blue eyes, that's a different kind of thing, right? And so the National Academy of Sciences had a meeting and had a big report that came out in March 2017, and they basically came to a conclusion, I don't know how much they were paid, that you would, right, if I asked you to do this. Okay, disease, sounds like that's probably okay. Some people still object to changing it at all. Remember, we're talking about changing forever. But if you have cystic fibrosis and you can eliminate that from your family tree forever, wouldn't you do that? Yeah, so that sounds like a good idea. So they said, okay, disease, that's fine. Enhancement, we know a gene that will make your muscles grow fast, myostatin. Should we add that to everybody? Probably not. They said that's probably not a good idea. Okay. So who's going to regulate that? Who's going to control that? This is in the United States. These are standards. Other countries might have different standards or different ideas about this. But the important point for you, then this is just science in the news, essentially, this is happening now, okay? The implications of this are now. They're not a decade from now. We're doing this now. Individuals are being changed. They're going to be treated with for cancer. They're going to be starting to change well-known genetic diseases. Let's say that the breast cancer proclivity gene, BRCA1, runs in your family. Wouldn't you want your daughters and your sons to no longer have that gene? How are you going to make those decisions? Who's going to do that? So it turns out that the first human attempt of this just happened up the road in Portland. And our colleagues at OHSU in August of 2017 announced that they had successfully edited the DNA of a human embryo. Okay, there's actually some controversy around the study. We don't have to get into it, whether or not they actually had demonstrated that they had done it. But suffice it to say that the future is now, and this is where we are. So I think that this is one of the most important developments in science, and I think it's a great example of how a fundamental discovery in bacteria translates into direct applications that we couldn't have foreseen and literally will change the world in the next 10 years. Okay, so you should be aware of it. That's my feeling anyways. And we should really be talking about these things. And that's why having a scientifically literate society that can understand, for instance, that DNA exists, something we didn't know, 60 years ago, is really important. And that's part of what our goals are in the Knight campus and at the University of Oregon. And I think it's something that I compliment you for being here this evening to participate in this discussion. But now on to the main event, which is Dr. David McCormick's talk. Okay, so David's going to talk about mind, brain, and reality, and other minor concepts. Okay? So it's my great pleasure, actually, to introduce David McCormick to you. David is a professor of biology, and he's also a presidential chair, of which there's maybe two at the University of Oregon. He's also the director of the Institute of Neuroscience, which is one of our great research institutes at the university. So David joined the University of Oregon just 9 months ago, and after spending 30 years at Yale University, where he's became a very prominent scientist. So this is a great coup for the University of Oregon, and we're very happy to have David here and to help us continue to build on our great neuroscience strengths at the university. So Dr. McCormick's research seeks to reveal the physiological mechanisms of sensory processing, and that's what he's going to be talking about today, using approaches that focuses on all the way down from the single cells, neurons, to connections of many, many neurons to the whole brain, all the way to how this translates into behavior. And he uses state-of-the-art techniques, including multiphoton microscopy, which allows you to view very precise things. And this is one of the coolest things in the last 15 years that's been developed, optogenetic activation. So you can shine light on a neuron and make it turn on. So there's some great, you should definitely Google this stuff. There's a great thing where there's a mouse walking down and you turn on a light and it starts turning around in a circle because you've turned on a specific neuron that makes it do that. It's really sci-fi stuff. Most recently, moving here, he's actually starting some new efforts, and he's investigating the mechanisms of how optimal neural and behavioral responses respond to rapid fluctuations in neural state, and how that contributes to the noisiness of the brain. And I think that will be another theme that we'll hear a little bit about. So in addition to generate all this renewed energy around the critical importance of neuroscience at the University of Oregon, he's naturally received a lot of national recognition, including he's a member of the National Academy of Medicine and a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And without further ado, then, I'd like to bring on David McCormick. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Glad to be here. I owe a debt of thanks to President Michael Schill and the Provost Giants Bonivar for hiring me and bringing me to Eugene. I'm very excited to be here. University of Oregon is a great place to be. It's on a dramatic upward trajectory in science, not only sports. And thank you. And it's also a wonderful community. One of the things that my wife and I have learned over the past few years, we lived with the students at Yale for the last 7 years in the dormitory. People often ask me, did you have a single or a double? Actually, we had an apartment. And also we traveled the world for student activities and met a lot of different communities. And that's one of the things we found is really important in life and in happiness. The quality of life is the community you live in. And we feel like Eugene is a wonderful community and it certainly has been very welcoming. And everybody's been really friendly, all the way down to asking in market of choice where something is, and they take you to each place and say, here it is. So I hope to give a talk that's both inspiring and thoughtful and makes you question a little bit the relationship between your brain, your mind, and what you perceive as reality. And the talk I'm going to give is a bit of a personal one. I apologize ahead of time, but I think it's the best way to get the point across. And in fact, you'll see from the talk, it's why I became a neuroscientist and why I'm interested in the relationship between the brain, the mind, and reality. So this first picture is a picture of my parents when they're on their wedding day. And even at this time, long before I was a reality, there was something in their lives that was going to impact my future very strongly. My mother grew up on a farm in South Carolina. This is a picture of the magnolia trees over the road that went down to her farmhouse, this is their driveway. And she had a pet horse, and a pet horse named Big Red. And Big Red one day reared up and kicked her, and it hit her in the jaw, and it broke her jaw. And she had a broken jaw, and she was fond of telling me how she had to have it wired shut and drink, for 6 months or something out of this. But just above your jaw is your temporal lobe. The highlighted area here is just above your jawline. So if you kind of point your jaw, just above it is where your temporal lobe is. It's one of the 4 major lobes of your brain. And it has a lot to do with memory and personality and other aspects of being human. Well, the broken jaw wasn't the only thing my mother suffered. She also suffered some damage to her temporal lobes. And because of that, a short time after the accident, she started having seizures. And she had a particular type of seizures called temporal lobe epilepsy. And this type of epilepsy may be different than what you might imagine a seizure would look like. It involves confusion because it activates not all of the brain, only particular parts of the brain, like the temporal lobe. And people that have this type of seizure will be confused. They might have some automatisms, like they may shake their arm, or they may lip smack, or they may just kind of stare into space. They won't be able to interact very often. So here's a gentleman that's given permission to use the video as a training exercise on having a temporal lobe epileptic seizure.
When people are speaking to him, and that he has purposeless movements of one hand as well as some swallowing automatisms. And this all goes on for about a minute and a half. Notice the mouth movements. Clearly he seems to be awake. Kevin. But seems somewhat confused. Kevin. Another important finding in looking at this attack is that there's a clear asymmetry with some tonic posturing of his right hand.
Kevin, can you hear me?
Okay, so he was having a temporal lobe seizure, that whole video there. Now, as a child, I grew up with my mother having these seizures regularly, I'd say at least once a week. And, she would be her normal self. And then all of a sudden, she would start having automatisms, and she would, lip smack. Sometimes she would rock back and forth, even banging her head on the wall or so on. And you could talk to her, but she wasn't there. And this was an amazing demonstration. Imagine having someone you know and love close to you having this type of seizure. It's an amazing demonstration of the power of the brain to mediate the mind. All right? So I see this as a child for my whole developmental period, and I asked my father, who was an electrical engineer. And by the way, at this time, I was working on electrical things and mechanical things a lot, my whole childhood. And I asked him, why does mommy behave so bizarrely sometimes? You just see this behavior. Why does it happen? So my father was an electrical engineer for Westinghouse. He said, well, she has electrical storms, which are seizures, in part of her brain circuitry, and this disrupts her sense of the world and her ability to think and feel properly. All right? This is an amazing statement, right? Because something physical gives rise to something mental, right? And I was working on televisions and taking them apart and so on. And wait a second, you say, let's go back to that statement, if I can. Electrical storms in part of her brain circuitry, And that disrupts their sense of the world and their ability to feel, right? So that's as if you're telling me the television has a mind, right? Because the television has circuitry, right? The brain has circuitry, the television has circuitry. If I disrupt the television circuitry, would it destroy the television mind, The people inside the television would do something different. It's quite amazing. And this is a movie. What movie is this? Men in Black. That's right. And the way we talk about ourselves, it's as if we're inside our bodies steering it around, And it's as if you open it up and you expect a little person in there running the controls, right? But that's not the way it is. You can look as much as you want for the person inside the body. You're not going to find it. Not a physical manifestation. You're going to find neurons. And that's what we're going to talk about. So that means this amazing structure inside your skull is somehow able to give rise to mental experiences. And more than that, it gives rise to your whole sense of reality. So our individual realities are not generated, they're not out here, they're in here. And they're an interaction between the nervous system and the information it's receiving. All right? So that means that, in a way, we're not really living in the real world. As individuals, we're not living in the real world. We're living our own individual world. All right? And the best we can do is hope to make our individual world as close to the real world as possible. Francis Crick, who I knew quite well because became a big fan of neuroscience, he was a discoverer of the structure of DNA, called this the astonishing hypothesis. Because it is truly astonishing to think of something physical giving rise to something mental. Right? So let's do a little neuroscience here to kind of give an idea of what this means and how it works. So how do we receive information? We receive information from our five senses: touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight, and so on. And they come in to the nervous system, to the brain. And we know the brain is the most important part of it because if you are unfortunately in an accident and you cut your spinal cord, you still remain you, right? Because that's your brain. But if you have a major stroke or something of your brain, you no longer are you. So we know the brain is the major component of being you, and it has all these nerves that innervate the body to get sensor information from the body, and also to control the muscles. And it has lots of nerves to connect to your eyes, your ears, and so on. So you're sitting in here in this brain, right? And you're getting information from these nerves. And the information comes in like Morse code. It comes in pulses. Pop, 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 pop. That's all you know. You don't know the sound of the trees, the wind through the trees. You don't know the feel of the wind. All you know is nerves firing on your skin, or nerves firing in your ear, or nerves firing in your eyes. And somehow the brain is able to take that pulses of activity like a computer and turn it into sensory perceptions and experiences. All right, so here's a picture of a brain in a human skull on the left, and here's a plastic one on the right. So the brain looks kind of all squiggly and folded up inside the skull there. When I was growing up, one of the most common themes in science fiction was, is it possible that we aren't in a body at all? We're just a brain in a jar. And you're just brain in a jar, and you're receiving electrical signals that it's like the Matrix, right? You don't live in the real world, you live in a fake world. Well, guess what? That's exactly what you are. You are a brain in a jar. We call the jar a skull, and the brain is you, and it's floating in this liquid in this skull, and it's receiving electrical signals from your nerves, okay? So you might think that this is a little bit of a flight of fancy because I'm telling you that you don't live in real reality, you live in your own reality. But we all experience this on a daily basis. We have dreams. Every night, you have about 2 hours of dreams, 2 hours of very vivid dreams. And these vivid dreams, we don't remember them well typically, because you don't wake up right after them, but they can be, surreal, like this person flying here. Those are kind of hallucinations, right? It's your brain creating a reality that you're asleep and experiencing, right? It can create, if you ever had a very vivid dream or a lucid dream, you can say, wow, that seemed really, really real. Your brain is capable of generating these realities, right? It's fully capable of generating these realities, and dreams show us that. If you have hallucinations during the day, it's a dream that occurs during the day. Your brain is now creating a reality, like a coffee cup talking to you. Your brain is creating a reality that doesn't actually exist, and you're awake, all right? It's like a waking dream, and then it would be real cause for concern because it's not normal, okay? So let's think about, how your brain creates these versions of reality, right? So first of all, I want to tell you what the brain is. Here's a human brain, half a human brain on the right side of this picture, and that's a monkey brain on the left. And I show you a monkey brain because we're going to unfold the monkey brain to show you what it's made of, all right? So we take the monkey brain and we unfold it there. There's several monkey brains, and on the right, it's completely unfolded. It's just a sheet. It's a sheet about 1/8 of an inch thick, all right? And it can be unfolded and spread out like that. So that's the same for us. Each side of the brain is a sheet on each side. And the human brain is about 16-inch diameter sheet. And the monkey brain is about 7-inch diameter sheet, right? So if you go online and you look up 16 diameter sheet, what you get is pizza, all right? It's about the size of a large pizza, all right? But you have two of those, okay? It's like you got a bonus pizza, okay? One for each side. And those are folded up to fit inside the skull because you couldn't have a head. Well, you could, but it would really be bad in the wind, right? If it was shaped like two pizzas. It has to be folded up, put in this round skull, okay? So here's your sheet. That's what all those foldings are, is the sheet is literally just folded up in a precise way to fit into the skull, all right? It's much easier to fit the sheet in there than a pizza in the skull. I tried. I got one sliced piece of pizza in there, and that was it. Okay, so here's the monkey brain unfolded, all right? Here in this flattened out monkey brain. And on the right is color-coded. And it's color-coded according to what that part of the brain is interested in. So some parts are interested in visual experience, some parts are interested in hearing, and some parts are interested in balance and smell and taste, thoughts, plans, memories, and so on. And we can color-code those. Those are on the right, right? So different parts of the brain do different things. And then the brain is made up of lots and lots and lots of brain cells. So if you take that sheet and you put it in a microscope and you start looking at it carefully, you see lots of these neurons. This is an artistic rendition of neurons. How many neurons do you think there are in the human brain? There's billions, right? There's 89 billion neurons in the human brain, which makes about 1 quadrillion connections, because each neuron has more Facebook friends than anybody I know. It has about 10,000 connections, and that means that you have about a quadrillion connections in your brain. Connections are where we think memories are stored, those connections. So you have a very large capacity for storing information in your head, all right? But these neurons don't, like I said, they're interconnected with 10,000 other neurons each. So they make these massive connections, kind of like a road map, a massive freeway system through the brain, in which these are called the neural circuits of the brain, all right? And this is an artistic rendition of neural circuits in the brain. And these neural circuits, when they operate, they give rise to behavior, they give rise to thought, they give rise to feeling, they give rise to everything you experience is believed to occur in these neural circuits. So this is an fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, of a human brain in real time showing how the patterns of activity, red is active and blue is inactive, change over time as the person is sitting in the scanner and told to do nothing, okay? And they just sit there and they kind of have random thoughts. And these are a representation of your thoughts, all right? Now, to go much further with that, the problem with fMRI is it's very slow. You saw the activity changing slowly. It relies on a technique that is limited to a few seconds, all right, in time, in its resolution. So we can, in the lab, we can take a mouse, for example, and there's a mouse brain on the right, and we can image that whole area under the black circle in this microscope. And when you look at the mouse brain, this is courtesy of Chris Neal, who's a professor at the Institute of Neuroscience at University of Oregon, and we present visual stimuli up on the left corner. You'll see these bright flashes in the back of the brain. That's the visual cortex, all right? That's the part of the brain involved with seeing. And whenever the mouse sees that image up there, the visual system lights up, all right? So we can watch the whole visual system and the whole brain, actually, while the animal's awake and behaving. And we don't even have to open the skull to do this. It glows right through the skull. We just look with a camera, all right? And then you can look at individual neurons. You can take that microscope and watch the individual neurons. They look kind of like, you know, Christmas tree lights or flying in over Eugene. And you see the little sparkling of the lights of the neurons. That means they're active, okay? So we can actually watch up to 100,000 of these neurons at a time in the mouse. Luckily, the mouse doesn't have, 89 billion neurons. It has far fewer. But we can watch lots of these cells while the animal's behaving and decipher what they're saying and what they're doing and how they're saying it and how they're doing it.
Response attack.
All right? Whoops, sorry. I'm going to, so this type of research, where has it led us? So now we can draw schematic diagrams, kind of like, when I was a child, I had a schematic diagram of a radio or a TV. We can actually draw a schematic diagram of epilepsy. So here's a schematic diagram of how an epileptic seizure is generated between the green cells, the blue cells, and the red cells, right? This particular type of a seizure is called an absent seizure, an absent seizure. It's characterized by an absence of behavior. So this girl is going to have an absent seizure here. If I click it, whoop, I'm sorry, let me go back. Let's go see if this plays. Oh, all right, one more time. Okay, here we go. No? She's having a seizure right now. Oh, I'm going to try this one more time.
Absence attack.
Here we are.
After a while, they take.
You have to look very carefully to see this young lady hesitate.
It is heavy as ever.
Okay, she's having a seizure right now.
And then return to normal.
Oh, pardon?
There you go.
I thought you said something.
No, I didn't say anything. I think it was grounded until.
So those few seconds where she was out of touch, her brain was violently discharging. And she was not there. People often ask me, what did she experience? She doesn't experience anything. It's like a blank spot. Okay, it's not darkness, it's just blank. It's just gone. It's like you edited the film and took the two ends and put them together. Okay, she's there, then all of a sudden she's not, and then she comes back. And that's why she said, pardon, right? Okay, so let's look at, so if epilepsy disrupts you, by disrupting the brain, how does the brain create you and your experiences in the first place? All right, so that you see where I'm going with this, the experience of watching somebody with epilepsy and how they disappear for the period of time that they're having a seizure, these types of seizures, and then they come back afterwards. You ask, how is it you were there in the first place? So let's take a look at vision. How do you have a visual experience? We're very visual animals. So visual experience has many different components. And the brain breaks these things down into components. You have form, you have color, you have motion, all right? And analyzing different parts of the brain. Now, remember I showed you the monkey brain with the different parts labeled color? The different parts of your brain analyze things like motion, color, and so on. And in fact, if you have a very specific lesion, it's very possible to be motion blind, where all you see is still images. You can be colorblind, completely colorblind, okay? And so on. So here's an example of form. These are penguins, and if you just take the edges of the penguins and look, the brain might just detect the edges, and you could tell, oh, those are penguins by looking at the form. But the problem with form is that you have to take a lot of shortcuts. Your brain takes a lot of shortcuts. And it needs to take a lot of shortcuts. You've got to have to behave in real time. You know, not only for sports, being able to catch a ball or hit the ball or so on, but in real time, just walking down the sidewalk, you have to do a lot of shortcuts. And these shortcuts give rise to illusions. So you don't actually see what's really there. You see what your brain interprets as most likely to be there, to be fast. All right? So does everybody agree that these two tables are actually identical? No. Well, they are. If I take the top on the left and turn it and put it on the one on the right, you'll see that they're actually, the tops of the two tables are the same. And it looks different because on the left, the table is oriented to go away from you, and here it's oriented to go sideways. All right? Whoops. I'm going to go back. I'm sorry. Let's try this one more time. Okay. A little problem with the clicker. Could you put it forward, please? And click forward one more time. Okay, there we go. And I promise that I am not changing that as I move it from one side to the other. Okay, it's the exact same top, and it's moving from the left side to the right side. Okay, and your brain is changing its shape, even though its shape is not changing. Okay, so here's an interesting illusion. This became popular recently on the internet. Here's a street, and if I take a copy of that same picture, hopefully this will work, and move it to the right, well, there, okay? The same picture, it's over here. You would swear that that street is going off at a steeper angle than this one, right? Because your brain is making assumptions about how things work in the real world. All right? And I'm going to put it back, and you can see it's the same picture. All right. B and A, are they the same color or different? What do they look like? It's a loaded question, right? Because you're gonna know if they were really different, then who cares, right? So your brain assumes that B is lighter than A because it's in the shade. And if this works, I'm going to take B. Whoops, no. You know that one. No. Could you try and click that and see if it'll play? There. Okay, now B is going over to A, and I'm not changing the color. It's that your brain says, oh, when B is in the light, it's dark, and when I bring it back to the shade, it must be light. Okay? It's the exact same color, it's just the way you're seeing it is different. All right? Everybody knows this as, this is the explanation for this. How many people see gold and white? Okay, how about the other alternative, black and blue? Anybody see black and blue? Right, it's the same picture. I'm not changing it. You know, half of you are seeing black and blue, and half of you are seeing gold and white. Yeah? And somebody said that, yeah, it's not purple and green. That's because your brain is making an assumption about the lighting conditions. Some of you are assuming it's in the shade, and some of you are assuming it's in the light, and that changes your perception of the color. Okay? All right, now I want you to stare at this X on here, and if we can get this to play properly, you're going to see a green dot moving around that's not there, and you're going to see the pink dots disappear if you keep your eyes very still. So let's see if this works. Can we get that to play? Click it forward. There we go. All right, you see a green dot floating around? And the pink dots should disappear if you keep your eyes very stable. Okay, now we go to forward. And now you see a lot of green dots, right? And that's because your nervous system adapts to things very quickly. And you see the opposite. So the opposite of the pink is green, right? It adapts because the efficient way to code information is to look for only things that change. This is a motion illusion. This is seeing motion when there is no motion. This is a static image, and if you look your eyes around, it looks like it's moving, right? Okay, so visual system fooled by things because it's taking shortcuts. Auditory system does the same, and putting the two together does the same, right? To behave in the real world, you have to use all of your senses, and that has to make sense. So let's see if we can play this video. Could you click it to play the video?
For
please?
example, listen to Greg speaking.
Bar, 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 bar.
What do you hear? If you heard bar, 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 you'd be right. But how about now?
Bar, 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 bar.
Chances are you heard far, far, far this time with an F, except you didn't. In fact, the audio didn't even change between the two videos.
Bar, bar, bar.
Strange as it may seem, what you hear depends on which video you're looking at. Go ahead, take turns watching each video and see how the sound morphs.
Bar, bar, bar.
This is a perfect example of something called the McGurk effect, which shows how our visuals can alter what we believe we're hearing.
So if you see the person saying far, you hear far. If you look at the person saying bar, you hear bar, right? This is an illusion in which I'll play this slide twice, and it's going to be exactly the same slide, and you're going to hear it as if the tones are continuing to rise higher and higher. It's called the shepherd illusion.
And
Now the same slide. Keeps getting higher, right? Because you've integrated the auditory information together over time, and the natural conclusion is getting higher and higher and higher, even though it's not.
It didn't get higher?
No. Okay, so here's an interesting question, right? This is the interesting question that you come to later in life, I think, and at least I did. If there are sensory illusions, which we all kind of play with as children, are there illusions in other aspects of our inner world? Right? Are there illusions in our emotions? Do we have illusionary beliefs? Do we have illusionary social constructs? Right? So, emotions, understanding emotion is incredibly important in being human. In most animal species, it's very important. We're very good at picking up on emotions in other people, right? So here's a woman that looks like she's smiling in both the pictures, right? But if I flip this over, you can see she's not actually smiling in both the pictures. That's because smiles, our upward turned mouth, is thought to be a happy face. It's a shortcut that our brain takes. Okay, here's another illusion. Social illusion. This is my dog on the pier, and she was very popular at Yale University. She had 3,503 Facebook friends. So here's social illusion number one. Lots of friends on social media means that have lots of friends in reality. You know, I have a lot of Facebook friends, so I am part of a healthy, caring community. I'm calling that social illusion number one. In fact, Facebook exists because of that social illusion, right? Here's social illusion number two. Here's the dog on the right. She's caught a Charmander on campus, and this particular post got 1,100 likes. So lots of likes on social media means people like me, and I'm making healthy choices. Okay, so to make a long story short, you know, both our sensory and our emotional, social, cultural worlds are filled with illusions. That's because they arise from shortcuts. You know, to operate in the real world, we have to have biases. We have to have guesses as to what's out there. And these biases are based on our evolutionary history, our culture, our individual experience, right? So the question is, what can we do about this? How can we drop our preconceived notions and both see and feel clearly? And for me, the early answer was science, but now I've come to realize that spirituality and meditation may play a particular role. Right? So about 10 years ago, at my wife's urging, I think she got tired of me being anxious and so on, I started doing mindfulness meditation. And mindfulness meditation is, a way to train your mind to learn to listen, observe, and be in the present moment without biases. That's without biases. You're trying to see what is reality, what's real. It's supposed to help you, and it does help you, realign your inner dialogue into a more healthy, wholesome, and accurate interaction with your life. All right? So because I was doing neuroscience and meditation, I ended up being a meditation teacher, actually. I was invited to participate in the Imri Tibet Science Initiative. The Dalai Lama has decided that they need to change their curriculum in their monastic universities. They hadn't changed it in 700 years. And so they decided that they needed to include science in their curriculum. So several of us go to this monastery, the Drepung Monastery in Mongod, India. It's in Karnataka, it's southwest India. And we teach the monks, right? And this is one of the monasteries there, Drepung Monastery. And at these monasteries, there's about 15,000 monks. And this particular room holds 10,000 monks. And I can tell you, it's a really moving experience to wake up in the morning and hear chanting, and to run down to the monastery, to the great room, the great hall, and to see 5,000 to 10,000 monks chanting in unison. And I asked the host, what are they chanting? And they said they're chanting for the betterment of all beings. They spend all day here because they believe that through their goodwill and good spirit, they can make the world a better place. All right? And so they also have classes, and here we are teaching our cohort of about 100 monks neuroscience. And here they are in the laboratory that they have equipped right there next to their classroom, looking at brain sections. You can see in the back of the wall a projected slide. They've never used a microscope before. In fact, most of them never even used a ruler before, or had heard of evolution or the equal sign or so on. So we were there, as a cultural exchange. We're trying to bring the scientific method to them because that's what they were interested in learning. And what do we learn from them? We learn from them a whole new way of thinking. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. All right, so, I was teaching a class to the monks, and I thought, well, these guys have really it takes 22 years to get their degree, by the way. So, tell that to undergraduates complaining about in a fifth year. It's 22 years of college or schooling to get their degree, and they've been studying, and they debate every day, and they must have really sharp minds, right? So let's test you out. So I'm going to compare you to the monks, all right? So I showed them the next slide, and I asked them, what is this on the slide? All right. So I'm going to ask you, tell me as fast as you can what you see in the next slide, and if you do see something, how many of them are there? All right? You ready? Three, four. How many say 3? 4. 5. Okay, good. All right, there are 5 horses. And so I showed this to the monks, and they all started shouting immediately. And they speak Tibetan. We don't speak English, so I have to go to the translator. So what are they saying? He says, horses. I said, immediately. It was instantaneous, And I said, okay, that's maybe they got lucky. So I said, how many are there? And they're all starting shouting again. And as soon as they translated to Tibetan, and I said, well, what did they say? And he says, 5. And I said, this is crazy. I was blown away, And so after that, I went to tea break, and I was talking to a couple other teachers and I said, these guys are amazing. They spend so much time meditating and studying, and they just see reality right away. They're not even affected by visual illusions, and we need to study them. We need to come and record from them. And I was very excited, and the other teachers got very excited too. And they said, well, what happened? Tell us what happened. And I said, well, I showed this visual illusion, and then they weren't fooled by it at all. And they said, which one did you show them? And I said, well, the one with the 5 horses in the snow. And they said, oh, we showed that to them yesterday. Yeah. So, after tea, I went back in the class, and I said, I heard you saw that picture yesterday. And they all like, hee, hee, hee. Okay, so, here's something I learned personally from the monks, all right? Their sense of community, and I learned the same thing from living with the undergraduate students. Their sense of community is incredible. They think about we and not me, They instantaneously think about we and not me. So here's an example. We wanted to teach, well, first of all, I should say something about Tibetan Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhism is unique in that it believes that a life centered on we and not me, a life centered on generosity, kindness, and connection is one of the main paths to being happy. So here we are, we're teaching, they never heard about evolution, so we wanted to teach the monks about evolution. So we asked them to come up to the board. We drew a tree on the board, all right? And then we said, these magnets are the fruit on the tree, and you're a bird. And we wanted to teach them how birds with different beak size would have different chances of survival, right? So we asked the first monk to come up and to try and take some fruit with his beak, which was a forceps. And he went up and with his little forceps, and he tried to get the fruit, and he couldn't get any. All right. So we said, okay, well then you're at risk of dying because you can't eat. So next monk comes up, right? And we said, okay, your beak is your fingers. Can you get some food? So he went over to the board here, and he grabbed some food. What do you think he did? Yeah, immediately he fed the other monk. All right. And I actually almost started crying. I had tears in my eyes because I was thinking, a little cynically, if I was back home, certain people would be stuffing their pockets with magnets. But we see that kind of thing over and over again. All right, so this is my last slide. So I guess my point of my talk is this. It's very simple, is that I wanted to bring up the very real possibility that not everything you believe is real. All right? Not everything you experience is real. And the interesting and exciting possibility is that means that there's a lot of room for growth, and there's a lot of room for engagement with the world in new ways that if you just learn how to do it, it can be done. And if we all were able to do that as a community and do it together, I think we'd be in a much better place. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, David, for an amazing, inspiring talk. So we want to continue this conversation, invite you to participate. We need some accoutrement here so that we could be a little more comfortable, because I'm sure we're tired of standing. So we're going to bring out some chairs and things like that. Thank you.
We have
All right. That's really critical. So,
are you ready? There you go.
all right. So,
Yes.
David, I have a couple of questions for you.
Where are
First
you?
of all, what is your perception of the University of Oregon through these lenses? So, I want to remind everyone, if you're prepared, can we advance the slide one more? Let's
Yeah.
do that. Whoop, too many.
There we are.
Can you guys see that beyond the trees? I'll remind you that if you want, please go ahead and text some questions. I have a number to start with. So thanks for that great talk. I think it's an interesting combination of the, hardcore science. I'd just like to start out and just ask you kind of what is your current work? You've just moved to the University of Oregon. What is exciting you about this next phase of your own research, and what do you plan to be looking at?
Well, neuroscience is at a phase now where we can, it's in a very exciting phase, and the University of Oregon has capitalized on that. It's an exciting phase because in the past it used to be you'd do work on humans or you'd work on animals, and there was a big gulf in between. You could work on single neurons or neurons in animals. You could work on fMRI or human behavior in people, but you couldn't really bridge that gap. And now we have the tools to get closer and closer to bridging that gap. And the Institute of Neuroscience has investigators working in people. We have investigators working in mice and Drosophila and C. elegans. And we're able to now get closer and closer to being able to bridge the gap in interesting questions. One of the things we're interested in is attention. How do you pay attention? How do you not pay attention? I call it seminar behavior, like or maybe hopefully you're not doing it now, but you're drifting off and then all of a sudden you snap back and then you drift off and you snap back. And we've been able to figure out the neural mechanisms of that by studying it in animals, yeah.
Great. So I'd like to pursue a question that's been asked. I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. I'm going to call it the two-pizza hypothesis.
Okay.
So we have two sides of our brain.
Yeah.
We got these two pizzas folded up in there.
Yeah.
What's the relationship between them? Why are there two? Do they do different things? How is that related to some of the topics that you maybe talked about? We hear about left and right brain, those kinds of issues.
Well, the world is lateralized, We have a right side of our body and we have a left side of our body. We have a right side of the world, visual world, left side of the visual world. And so an answer to analyzing that kind of information was to have two halves of the brain. Now, people often talk about these two halves as if they have unique features, which is true. They do to some extent, like language. If you're right-handed, it comes from your left. All right, anybody left-handed here? Yes, where do you think you have language? Well, on the right hand, it's on the left, and the left-handed people, it's either on the right or the left. It's 50-50, okay? You have only one language area, so if you lose that, you're going to have a very difficult problem with the language. But the two halves of the brain have specializations, but they're strongly interconnected. There's lots and lots of axons, fibers connecting the two halves of the brain. All right? So your brain acts as one. You have one mind. All right? You think to yourself, you have one mind. That's because of all those connections in your brain, putting all those parts together. Think about it. You have all those parts analyzing motion, touch, color, but I see one world. That's because all the different parts of your brain are wired strongly together. Yeah.
So here's a great question that I think integrates the first and second halves of your talk, especially you talked about teaching the monks evolution. So we have this evolutionary history. Obviously, the monkey pizza smaller than the human pizza, the mouse pizza much smaller still. So we're obviously constrained by that history and the way that our brains are configured. And there's this idea through the spirituality that somehow we can transcend those constraints. Do you see pathways to that, or are there ways of sort of evolving outside of our current structures? What relationships do you see there?
So I think that you're a product of genetics and environment. That's obvious. My teacher, who studied development, was asked once, what percentage is the brain genetics, and what percentage is environment? And he said it's 100% genetics, and it's 100% environment. And so we acquire a way of thinking through our childhood, through our parents, through our families, through our culture, through our friends, and so on. And we think that our way of thinking is often right. But you have to realize that our way of thinking is very unique to our time and our experience. And I think that by really getting to know other cultures and how they think and trying to understand why they think that way, and also trying out a bit of their practices, you can expand your mind and come to realize that maybe you were in a good place, but you weren't in the best place. Or maybe you were in a bad place, you need to be in a better place. And there are established practices to doing that, meditation being one of them. Yeah.
So let me pursue that a little bit. We are in Eugene, so this is a question you won't get in Indiana.
Yeah, that's where I grew up, by the way.
So the president gave a very nice talk this afternoon. He raised the name of Ken Kesey as one of these things. So there is this idea that you can use external agents, shall we say, to change your consciousness, LSD being one of those. It was popular for a brief moment of time, perhaps. I'm sure no one here remembers that experience. But what do you think about that? Is that a different path towards enlightenment? What are people experiencing, and what does that really mean?
Yeah, when we moved here, where we're used to Europe, and we saw all these green crosses, and we thought, well, those are apothecaries, right? And now they're homes of enlightenment. There's nothing better than the natural way, I would say. So I think that if you could get to a spiritual experience in a natural way, it's much, much more healthy.
So pursuing the meditation a little bit, and we obviously can't get into this, but there's a number of questions about
Come on, bring her over.
Come on over. Special guest star.
All right, here we go.
I'm experiencing this artificial sense that maybe I don't have any friends now.
Okay, sit down. Okay, good.
All right.
It's
And that's the end of the
a little
talk.
bit of a distraction.
So if I had to ask you what was the most important insights that you've learned in interacting with students over the years, what would your response be?
Bring a dog.
Yeah. All right.
It's very real because I used to walk across campus with this dog every day, and the dog is a great icebreaker. And I met people of all walks of life, and it's just, I realize there's a common humanity, and people are really wonderful when they have something neutral to bring them together. And she was able to do that, and really made me feel much more engaged with humanity and community just by simply having a dog. So I'm really happy that seeing a lot of dogs in Eugene and on campus. So.
Okay, so this is a great segue to a different area. I've heard that the purpose of the internet is to actually share videos of dogs and cats.
Yes.
It also has a minor role, like very tiny in research, which is what it was invented for. There's other uses like shopping and things like that. You talked a little bit about this perceived reality, and I think many of us who are parents are interested and or concerned about what's happening in terms of the projection of ourselves through the internet. And you touched on a little bit that it's a false perception. I wonder if you could just pursue that a little bit more. What you see, are we changing our brains in interacting in this way? Is it just something else that's going on? Please ignore the dog. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to focus on me.
She heard that. Yeah.
That's really nice.
She doesn't like you anymore.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is the best dog I've ever seen in my life. I love it. Okay. Anyways, back
Yes.
to the problems of the world.
Yes, I think that a hard-earned lesson is that your mind is just like your body. If you harm your body, it's going to have wounds and scars. And the same with your mind. If you're not careful about treating it with care and respect, it's going to accumulate wounds and scars, and it's going to be a little bit difficult to heal those. And so I think that everything can be used and everything can be misused. And I think the internet is a wonderful thing that can be used, but it also can be misused. And so I think carefully myself now. Where do I read my news? What do I expose myself to? There are healthy choices and unhealthy choices, and sometimes I have to check myself and say, is this good for me, or is it? I want to develop wisdom and knowledge and connection without unnecessarily harming myself and others. Yeah.
So I think pursuing that a little bit further, you talk a lot about, we are essentially brains in vats, and so perception of the outside world. And we're approaching this time of virtual reality, which is one thing, but I think continuing on the theme that it's important to have an educated populace, what about the manipulation of perception? How do we detect that? How do we check ourselves? We now know, for instance, you can edit videos and make things seem what they're not. There might be other ways of manipulating the way that we are in the world. Do you have any thoughts about how science has a role to play in thinking about that?
Yeah, so, there's two ways to see clearly. The monastic tradition is to meditate and think on things and to discuss them and use logic, deductive logic, to reason how things should be or are. And the scientific way is a hypothesis-driven mechanism. I think you need both. So the scientific method is to have a hypothesis. I believe this. I propose this. Well, let's design an experiment to see if that's true. And you do an experiment, collect data, and then see if your hypothesis holds or not. And so both traditions have something to add. Not everything is open to scientific inquiry, and not everything is open to just introspection. Yeah.
So we're getting a ton of questions about meditation per se. We can't pursue them all. A lot of the questions are, what are the paths towards getting into meditation? What are the resources that people might pursue?
Well, Eugene
what do you
has-
recommend?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My wife is here, could take the dog back. You're being quite ornery now. Eugene, I'm new here. I've only been here a few months. I haven't quite gotten into the community yet, but I know Eugene has quite a few groups, and I would recommend that you join a group and try different groups out, and because it's a community. Even though you're being silent, it's a kind of shared experience that's very community oriented. And also you need a good teacher, someone when you have troubles on your path of learning, you need some guidance. So I would just look for groups, ask people around if they've joined a group that they've enjoyed, and then join one. There's also there are even apps. I'm not trying to promote cell phone usage, but there are apps like Headspace that actually is written by a very accomplished teacher of meditation that's very good. And so you can, if you have to do it on your own, you could try out the apps.
So it sounds like part of the message there is it's a skill. Just like
Ooh.
learning something else, there are people who
yeah.
know the path towards helping you achieve that.
Yeah, I used to teach undergraduates meditation, and so they had this perception that they would come in and meditate, and everything would be great, and they'd go on their lives. But I say, look, the first time you sit down and try to meditate, it's like the first time you've ever been to a gym. You've never been to a gym before. You go to the gym, you don't come back all buff and strong and ready to go. You come back saying, wow, I really need to go to the gym, okay? It's the same with meditation. You sit down and try and silence your mind, and you realize it's not silent at all, and it's really hard to do that. Same deal. You have to decide, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to have a runaway mind, and you have to dedicate some time to that. I would say, a good practice is a half hour a day. But even a few minutes can help. But look, we're so used to the idea that physical health is really important. Why don't we have the same devotion to mental health?
No.
Yeah.
So, so there's literally dozens and dozens of questions, but we need to wrap up to let people go on their evening. David has generously agreed to greet some of you. Obviously, we can't greet 700 people, but afterwards. But I just have one more question. I think almost a completely unique feature of what you talked about this evening is this. All right, there goes the dog. Good work. I don't want to say that David had that dog waiting just in case he bombed, but I got to say, David, dog was not needed, but it was a great addition to the evening. I can't. This is Eugene. Welcome to it.
Thank you.
You're obviously a great addition as well. So this unique aspect is, you mentioned the words science and spirituality in the same talk. It's not something that we normally hear about. We think of science as dry. You see science as a way of gaining insight and other insights. I just wonder what you think about, we sometimes hear about these two ways of being in the world, and they're incompatible. This even emerges within the university itself. What are your thoughts about kind of the future of how we think about the relationship between these? Do they come together? Do they continue to drift apart?
Well, I think they will come together. I think there are two aspects of being human, knowledge and of one type, which is experimental knowledge, experiential knowledge, and knowledge of another type, which is spiritual knowledge of what it means to be human, what it means to be alive, what it means to be a part of a people, a group, a community, not only people, but animals and plants and the earth. So I get humbled, especially being a neuroscientist, because my talk was about how something physical gives rise to something mental, right? We can't explain that in science. And I'm not going to say that there's, something, I'm not going to say that I don't know exactly what it is about the universe that makes it really special, but I know that it is special because something physical gives rise to something mental. And I've talked to a lot of neuroscientists. I've had the privilege to talking to Nobel Prize winners and top people at all levels in neuroscience. And I can tell you, as far as I'm concerned, no one has given me a satisfactory answer to why something physical gives rise to something mental, why we're not just walking around zombies, with no minds. So the fact that the universe has that in it, it has mental experience coming out of neurons, neural networks being active, to me means that there's two aspects to being alive. There's the mental part and there's the physical part, and we should pay attention to both.
Great. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, David, for a wonderful evening.